So I have my notes here. Today we're going to be doing an in-depth look into the Battle of Manzikert, fought between the Byzantine Empire and the Seljuk Turks. So the Battle of Manzikert was fought on August 26th, 1071, after death, one day before my birthday. Uh, the battle was one of the most consequential battles in the medieval world. It fundamentally altered the political landscape, political, cultural, and religious landscape of the Near East, transforming it from a majority Orthodox Christian into the emerging Sunni Muslims. Historians debate whether if the battle itself was immediately catastrophic or its long-term consequences reshaped the landscape of Anatolia, but it did weaken the Byzantine Empire permanently, ultimately leading to their fall in 1452. It accelerated the migration of the Turkish population into Asia Minor, and it also indirectly contributed to the rise of the Crusades, as we discussed in the previous video. The battle represents not only a military defeat, but also the collapse of Byzantine political cohesion and imperial authority. Some historical background on the subject. So, by the mid 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was experiencing growing internal and external pressures, while the empire had reached a high point under Emperor Basil II in the early 11th century. Later emperors weakened in the military system by reducing the power of the provincial armies and relying increasingly on mercenaries, i.e. the Varangian Guard. At the same time, new enemies were emerging on multiple frontiers. In the west, the Normans have been threatening Byzantine holdings in Italy, as we see with the Norman invasion of Sicily. And in the east, the Seljuk Turks and the Muslims were rapidly expanding into Armenia and Anatolia. The Seljuks, some backstory on them. They are originally Turkic nomads from Central Asia, the steppes, who had been converted to Islam and established a massive empire stretching from Persia all the way to the Islamic Near East, encompassing Syria, modern-day Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and so forth. These incursions obviously threatened Anatolia, or Asian Minor, and under Sultan Alp Arslan, the Seljuks conducted raids deep into the Byzantine territory, threatening their sovereignty. So Anatolia is the economic and military heartland of the Byzantine Empire. Anatolia provided a lot of tax revenue. It had a lot of fertile land, and was the majority of their manpower reserves. Losing control of this region would cripple Byzantine power. Emperor Romanos IV recognized the seriousness of this threat and launched a major eastern campaign in the year of 1071 to restore Byzantine power and authority. His objective was not only defensive, but he intended to reinsert the dominance of the Byzantine Empire over Armenia and secure the eastern frontier before the Seljuks could permanently destabilize the region. And now we're going to get into the composition of the Byzantine Imperial Army. So one of the most important aspects of the Battle of Manzikert was the fragile composition of the army itself. Earlier Byzantine armies were structured. Their structure had heavily relied on disciplined native thematic troops tied to local landholding systems, kind of like how we see with the feudal systems in Western Europe, where the vassals are obliged to provide military service with their lords. However, by 1071, the empire increasingly depended on mercenaries. Like I mentioned earlier, the Varangian Guard was a detachment of Germanic converts from Scandinavia who were brought down to fight for the Byzantine Empire because of their lack of political affiliation. And so One of the problems is that obviously why they had to get these mercenaries was the military was politically divided between arist- aristocratic factions. Emperor Romanos assembled a diverse force that included professional soldiers, Armenian volunteers, Frankish and Norman mercenaries, Turkic mercenaries, ironic enough, Pechenegs, which are like the modern day Hungarian people, Georgian auxiliaries, and provincial levies. So this diversity created a lot of problems in the battlefield in terms of cohesion and loyalty. Some Turkic mercenaries, as you can infer, obviously defected during the campaign, while rival Byzantine aristocrats undermined Romanos politically even before the battle began. The Byzantine Empire's military weakness at Manzikert was therefore not simply tactical, it reflected a deeper structural decline. The empire had become increasingly dependent on unreliable mercenaries because the traditional military landholding system had deteriorated rapidly under aristocratic pressure and political corruption. On the other side, Sultan Alp Arslan, and the Seljuk strategy, the Sultan initially did not seek a massive confrontation with Byzantium, preferring to stick to smaller scale battles and that sort of thing. He was currently facing a campaign in modern day Syria when Romanos began his advance eastward. And once the Sultan learned of the Byzantine offensive into his land, he moved rapidly north to intercept their force. The Seljuk Turks, they excelled greatly in mobile cavalry warfare, unlike the heavily armored Byzantine forces. The Seljuk armies relied on the very famous Turkic horse archers, speed, feigned retreats, encirclement tactics, and psychological warfare. The Seljuks avoided direct frontal clashes whenever possible because they know they lose. Instead, they exhausted the enemy through constant harassment and maneuvering. Their tactics reflected the military traditions of the Eurasian steppe, where mobility and flexibility were more important than rigid and heavily armored formations. This contrast between the Byzantine heavy infantry and the Seljuk mobile cavalry symbolized a large transformation occurring across the medieval world. Traditional imperial armies increasingly struggled against highly mobile cavalry forces capable of exploiting terrain, speed, and disunity. Moving on to the battle itself, Romanos made a critical strategic mistake before the battle even began. He divided his army. He sent part of his force under Joseph Tarquiniotis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry. He sent this force toward Aklat while advancing separately towards Manzikert. The detached force was never successfully able to rejoin the main army, leaving Romanos significantly weaker than expected. And then on the day of August 26th, the Byzantine army advanced against Seljuk forces near Manzikert. Alp Arslan employed classic steppe tactics, using mounted archers to harass Byzantine lines while retreating gradually in a crescent formation. Byzantine troops pursued, stretching their formations and losing cohesion. As evening approached, Romanos ordered a withdrawal back towards the camp. This moment became disastrous. Communication broke down, formations were collapsing, and confusion spread throughout the army. At the same time, Andronikos Doukas, a political rival connected to the powerful Doukas family, allegedly, they abandoned the battlefield with reserve forces after declaring the emperor dead. Whether if this was deliberate or just a panic, the withdrawal triggered a general cause of concern. The Seljuks were quick to exploit this chaos. The Byzantine force became surrounded and fragmented. Romanos fought fiercely and was wounded before being captured alive by Alp Arslan. This was a big humiliation because Roman emperors were really taken prisoner in battle. On to why the Byzantines lost. The Byzantine defeat resulted from multiple interconnected failures. The empire was, as I stated earlier, was deeply divided between different factions. Romanos lacked full support from the Constantinopolitan elite, especially the Doukas family, their rivals. And this rivalry had weakened the military unity even before the battle began. The the over-reliance of mercenaries, as stated earlier, their tactical inferiority, as their heavy infantry were just unable to fend off these horse archers efficiently. Strategic errors like dividing the army. We saw that lost a huge contingent of the military. And their poor reconnaissance as well also allowed the Seljuks to manipulate their movements. The battle became a psychological collapse because their cohesion essentially disintegrated. Once reserves withdrew and rumors spread, discipline collapsed across the army. The immediate consequences of this is that the military losses at Manzikert may have not been completely irreparable. Alp Arslan did not attempt an immediate conquest of all of Anatolia. In fact, he treated Romanos relatively leniently and negotiated terms for his release. The real disaster is what occurred afterwards. When Romanos returned back to Constantinople, he was quickly overthrown by his political enemies, and they actually blinded him and then killed him in a gruesome manner. This then triggered years of Byzantine civil war and internal chaos. During this instability, the Turkic groups took advantage of it and flooded into Anatolia without a problem. However, this distinction is very important. The Manzikert battle did not destroy Byzantium, but the political collapse after the battle allowed Anatolia to slowly be conquered. Modern historians increasingly emphasize that the aftermath mattered more than the battlefield casualties themselves. Onto the long-term historical importance of the battle. Perhaps the most important consequence was the gradual Turkification of Asia Minor. Before Manzikert, Anatolia was a majority Greek-speaking and Christian population. After the battle and the migrations, Turkic Muslim populations increasingly settled throughout the region. Over the centuries, this transformed the landscape of Anatolia into a foundation of later Turkish states, including eventually the rise of the Ottoman Empire and modern-day Turkey. The decline of Byzantine power, the loss of Anatolia devastated Byzantine resources. They had fewer soldiers, reduced tax revenue, weakened frontier defense, and economic contraction. The empire survived for centuries afterwards, but it never really fully recovered to its peak strength pre-Manzikert. This was also acting as I stated earlier, the prelude to the Crusades. The weakening of Byzantium forced later emperors to seek military assistance from Western Europe. The famous Emperor Alexios I Komnenos eventually appealed to the papacy for aid, helping inspire the First Crusade in 1095. Thus, Manzikert indirectly contributed to one of the most defining religious movements of medieval history, if not probably the most defining. The broader historical meaning of Manzikert is that the battle symbolizes several larger historical transformations. The end of Byzantine dominance in Anatolia, the empire lost secure control over its core territories. There was the rise of Turkish Islamic power, the transition of medieval warfare, and the political fragmentation. And lastly, the historiographical debate of the Battle of Manzikert. Older historians often describe Manzikert as a sudden catastrophic collapse. Modern historians actually take to argue a more nuanced view. Many people now argue that the Byzantine army was not entirely annihilated. The empire still possessed substantial resources afterwards, hence why they were able to survive for so long, about like 400 years. And the real catastrophe came from the civil war and political fragmentation. In this interpretation, the Battle of Manzikert was less a single fatal blow, but more of a trigger of events, like a domino effect of that exposed long-standing weaknesses and that were already present within the Byzantine society. The battle, therefore, matters not simply because Byzantium lost, but because the defeat revealed how fragile the empire had become internally.